call us to order at 7:04, we can get rolling.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All right, so all in favor. There we go. All right, so 7:04, we're up and running. Dano and Bob were present last night. I don't know if either of you feel like there's any value in giving a quick summary of what we discussed last night. I think I might even use the same slide presentation we used last night a little bit tonight, but I don't know if you guys feel like there's any value to just make a quick recap on your take of last night.
No.
Right.
I think Jeff, you did a great job. I don't know if we got to go through all that with the group, but I'd love to hear what we got to get through tonight in terms of decisions. I remember, it feels like we're up against the wall according to how it sounded last night in terms of weighing in on stuff. But I had a few questions from last night that I wrote down and wanted to talk about when we get around to it. So,
okay. Well, I think, largely then, I don't know that we have to rehash everything the same way we did last night. We will run through the budget stuff on our own, and you guys can raise your own questions, and we'll talk through that. I'm going to share right now. This hopefully, for the most part, is going to put to bed the Cutler presentation. But this is, if you recall, the last time we spoke, the last piece that had to be put in was the tax rate analysis for Cutler, and Jared had a suggestion of moving into sort of this area here, removing some of the footnote type information and putting in just a much more year one, year 20 and average, for each person, the average home, the median home, and the per $100,000, rather than, at the table that for Excel geeks like me is exciting, but most people don't want to look over on that side. They just want the quick answer. So I had put this part in, sent it to Jared to sort of get his sense of whether that was sort of what he was looking for. He seemed to think that made sense. So I figured I would pop it up for the group to take a quick look and see if anybody had any input on that change. All right.
That looks clear to me.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So I think that's as I was telling Jared, I think Finn had asked me to go through and do a sort of final review of the whole deck, and we found a few small changes that will update. Not in any material manner, but we'll update some of the sensitivity tables and that type of thing. So we'll probably be working on updating that whole deck over the next week and finalizing that. But I think we're pretty much in agreement, with substantively what's in there. So I think we're probably ready to sort of put this to bed.
One other, it's 11th hour, but I guess this is a question for Jared or Bob or David, anybody. This is just like the whole ball game to me, in my opinion, this slide, and it's super good work and really important for the town. I don't know if we're making a big enough deal of it, or if we're clear enough about, like, this is everything. This is the school plus 20 years of compounded growth of rates, plus whatever assumptions about other expenses and capital and other things, like, to remind the people looking at it, like, this is what you've been asking for, a comprehensive view of the tax implications. It says tax implication on Wenham of the as proposed, but it's a comprehensive view of the taxes for the future, really. It's not just. So I don't know. Are we making a big enough deal of this slide?
So I guess the point there might be, let me just do a different share here. Daniel, the question I guess might be is, do you feel like this slide or something similar to this is either the next page of that deck, or maybe this is the page that goes in instead?
Or is this going in the warrant book in our our write-up for the stuff and the public's gonna see, then that's good enough.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think it probably will. I know it will for sure go in supplementary budgetary stuff we're doing, but I think in the past maybe there was pushback at the select board level on how much goes into the booklet. But I think, to your point, this year, and this is such a large vote that we're taking. I think, the last thing we want to do is be accused of diminishing or minimizing the information that we have, so that someone says, geez, yeah, you told me what the cost of Cutler was, but you didn't really give me enough information about how that tied into what I would really be paying in 10 years. If I understood that I would be paying $23,000 and not just 2,200 extra dollars, I might have viewed it differently. So I think it belongs
I
to.
don't know the right answer. I just think at some point we need to say it really loud and clear to the town. Here's your comprehensive view of taxes, even if it's a sentence that's bolded in the write-up or something. But I get that Cutler presentation's a separate deal, and that makes sense. So let's move on from that. Like, that's okay. That's a separate. I
Okay.
was conflating the two topics.
Okay. So we have in terms of the agenda, we listed operating budget and then capital. I don't, we don't necessarily have to take those in that order. I don't know if anybody has any preferences in terms of which one we tackle first. I did send out a few different pieces of information on capital. I got an additional round of information from the police chief on new vehicles, and also sort of the inventory of vehicles we have. And then we also passed around from the DPW today, sort of a semi-recent end of 2024 summary of his vehicles and equipment.
But do we have to, but back to my question earlier, Jeff, do we have to vote before the select board drop dead date of March 4th, and they've got to vote?
Yeah, that would be the fourth would be we would want to have our recommendations to them by the fourth, which would then allow us to turn around the booklet by roughly the 10th or 11th, whatever it is, to get it out to folks.
So that's either tonight or next Wednesday. Then we got to go through all the articles and kind of say yay or nay to each of them.
Yeah, I would say over the next couple of weeks.
Because that seems like a decently time-consuming exercise, but maybe it's not. I just remember in previous years we got through some of the kind of no-brainer items pretty quickly during a one meeting, and then we got through the more debatable items in another meeting. And I guess just when
Yeah.
we go through all that, are we doing that tonight, or when are we doing
Yeah, I
that?
mean, I think, largely I was hoping we could progress through, whether it's capital or operating. I think there are probably several that are, to your, kind of point, sort of the no-brainer ones. And then there are going to be the handful of each capital or operating that, you may want to have, some questions on, that you say, could you, sort of like you did with the police, cruisers and things, Jeff, can you provide for us over the next few days, the following information, so that we can be ready to make a decision, on these harder items in the next week or so.
I guess maybe that's what I'm getting at, and maybe that's just me, but I think it feels like we're past the good idea cutoff point and past the debate point, and right now I mean, I don't know, we're just understanding. Are we gonna change anything on what we're looking at potentially?
I think you still can. I mean, if you have areas that you're focused on, and, and I think, I mean, honestly, there is on the capital, I forget how many articles are on the capital. If I just pull that up real quick, for at least for myself. 1, 2, 3, so 3, 6, 10. There's probably about 14 items on the capital schedule. I would say some of those are sort of the no-brainers, throwing $50,000 at additional supplementary funding to offset Chapter 90 funding that we use to fix roads up, fix, sidewalks, that kind of thing. I think are fair, fairly, we do that pretty much every year. And I think, we've got a pretty good track record of, implementing that fairly well and staying ahead of the curve compared to some other towns. I don't know how much debate is warranted for a new entry door for the Council on Aging or some new gutters at the Council on Aging for, $3,000 or $4,000 a piece. But the new car, the comprehensive housing and economic development study, those are bigger ticket items that might dictate more discussion there. So maybe we start with the capital just because that's, a somewhat smaller subset, and maybe that's easier to move through.
Sure.
Okay.
Jeff,
let me
are
just-
you also suggesting that we act on items that actually end up in the warrant separate from the capital budget itself?
I'm sorry. Say that again, Bob.
Are you suggesting we act on items that are in the warrant that, in addition to the total capital budget? Try to do two things at once?
Can you give me an example of that? I'm just trying to think of what that might be.
I'm not sure. I thought you were,
Well,
Maybe
the other
it's
thing is the
irrelevant.
operating budget. I guess I was just looking at the operating budget. The only other thing that will be in the warrant book are things like, do we want to put money in stabilization? Do we want to put money in OPEB, extra money in OPEB, those type of things. And then there are a couple of items that came up last night, putting some free cash money into a fund for the ambulance and a revolving fund for the permitting group and the software fees that they have to pay. Those would be a couple of extra items that wouldn't be in the capital budget per se, but are some other articles that might be in the warrant. And
So
then
bo-
last night, I also floated the potential of paying down a bond.
So could we, to Bob's idea, and I guess this is aligned with what I was saying, to make things more efficient while we're looking at this, can we also look at the articles? I don't know if it's side by side, the capital related articles, so we can just kind of spend our time on the things that are debatable instead of going through every item.
Sure. Let me just pull that up. So let's try this. All right, so hopefully we'll see the warrant articles here. Welcome. All right, so yeah, here's right off the bat, the big one, the Cutler School. Largely we've discussed this one. Citizens petition is
Jeff?
not. Yep.
we talked about this at a prior meeting. I know this is preliminary, but there are votes shown on that one, the one for the Cutler School. And
Yeah.
that's not the vote that was taken at, so. I
Yeah,
think
and I can assure you that
being
none of
circulated and it might confuse people.
Yeah, it's none of these have been. These are all been placeholdered by the town administrator's office. I assure you, none of them, none of the votes or anything like that have been updated. I know that because I think they just used whatever was in that placeholder last year. And last year it had a 5-0. But yeah, I think you're probably going to see that. I haven't. It's not my document, so I haven't updated it yet. But you're going to see that throughout. I would imagine.
Well, I think when I went through it, that the other stuff was 3 zeros.
Okay, well, then I'll speak to Steve about
That's why
that.
the Cutler one stood out as something that maybe we should address. If the others all had random numbers, then there'd be less of a concern.
Okay, I'll save that now. I just made that change.
Okay.
Uh,
I agree with you though. I think like if that gets circulated in any way, which this stuff will, it's just gonna confuse people.
yeah, and this is definitely an internal document
Yeah.
right now. it's only been circulated to town council. This article here, it got a little bit of discussion last night. I don't think it really, I mean, I suppose you will have to weigh in on it, but if any of you have ever noticed on your tax bill, in the third quarter, there are boxes you can check to make contributions to scholarship funds. The organization Wish, which is a charitable organization here in Wenham. Gary would like to get rid of some of these, the education fund and the scholarship fund. They're very low participation in these. And so they're almost more work to maintain than they are, doing any kind of, real work for people. So there's a discussion of removing the fund going forward, and then as a cleanup, we would vote to essentially give these money, the funds to either the Friends of Bucher for the education fund, or that I guess Hamilton Wenham has an education fund that potentially could take these funds as well. But it just, if we continue to collect these monies, there's really not that much, the funds aren't that much that are collected. And, we don't really want to have yet another committee to be overseeing how to give away $500 or whatever. So you would probably vote on this, in support of the idea essentially of shutting it down. But I don't really think it's a material financial issue. For you guys to have to worry about. It's really just trying to clean up and streamline things internally and have, a couple of less funds to collect and maintain. And that's probably an easy one where it's easier to just vote with Finn when we have a full quorum so that we're voting, 5 people.
Okay, yeah,
I'm
that's
just
gonna be my
thinking
question.
we
Just vote on it now if, we think there's gonna be a quorum, but
Okay. And Dano, you were saying something.
No, go ahead, David.
no, I was just gonna say just vote now on some of the stuff that may be not controversial, unless people feel strongly.
I agree.
Yeah, I
If
mean,
we're here, we can check it off. It doesn't have to be, I guess we can, well, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
we're
I don't think it's a big
sufficient,
deal.
so we don't have to rehash it again.
Yeah,
Yeah, all
especially
right.
one we think will be unanimous. I think if anyone feels strongly that they want to wait for Finn, fine, but like I'll vote in favor of this. So
Okay. So you want to make a motion to, these aren't numbered yet, so I guess take a motion to vote in favor of the disbursement and cleanup of scholarship and education funds?
yeah, I'll take a motion. Looking for a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
David.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so 4-0 in favor. Just see if either of these, I mean, Cutler, that's already voted on. So disbursement, okay. Okay, so this one here, this is something you're probably going to largely support as well. This is a vote to increase the COLA for the exemptions provided to qualified disabled veterans in Wenham. So if you meet the qualifications, you are allotted an exemption under Mass General Law on your property taxes. This just allows it to go up, the COLA to increase under the Mass General Law, which I would assume this is another one that folks would be, sort of in favor of in lockstep.
Fine with me.
Yeah.
Same.
All right,
Yeah.
so you to make a motion to accept General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 5, Clause 22I, to increase the COLA for disabled veterans exemptions.
So moved.
Second.
Favor?
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Okay, so colon. All right. All right, this is a bigger one, annual operating budget and appropriation for the town and the schools. That's probably
Let's come
too
back
big
around to that. Yeah.
Um, this would be probably a comeback around, this is the funding the entire capital program as presented in the presentation I sent you guys, so 1,300,000-ish. So we'll probably come back around to that. Stabilization, using free cash to fund stabilization in a way similar to what we did last year. I'm thinking we're probably not there yet, but we, did discuss it a little bit last night.
Happy to wait on that.
Yeah, OPEB, funding OPEB with extra money. I think that's pretty similar. I would probably a hold on that. Prior year bills, we're gonna need to wait to get an actual dollar amount. We'll have these coming in right up until probably the last minute to be paid. You sort of largely have, we're legally obligated to pay the bills. The distinction with us is that if I get a bill from, June of 2024, I can't just pay it because it's a prior year. I have to get town meeting approval to do that. So we'll wait on that one. Article to fund the collective bargaining agreements. There's 3 of those out right now. We have to wait on that because none of them, one of them is tentatively agreed to, but none of them are signed yet. So we're not ready there. Cemetery and other, this is really just kind of administrative. Cemetery, other trust funds, will we vote to accept the cemetery and other trust funds received in the calendar year? This is just a procedural vote that we take every year to accept the funds from the cemetery or the trust fund boards that are sort of putting them back into the town funds to be used for other purposes. That's one you could probably vote on because it's really just procedural.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
so cemetery trust funds, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all right. Cemetery sale lot transfer will have to wait because this will actually be a sum of money that you'd have to be voting on. So I think we have to wait for that number. Adoption of the prudent investor language. I don't know how many of you have been around for some of these discussions. But the prudent investor language is very similar to sort of the prudent investor rule that's in place for trusts and estates, in the estate planning world. Basically, the town invests trust funds under the current Mass General law that essentially it focuses on safety, liquidity, and yield. And we can only invest in a very finite number of stocks and bonds and a very few number of mutual funds. What adopting this language would allow the town to do is to essentially invest our trust funds much more like we invest our OPEB account. It would allow us to have a much more diversified portfolio where in theory we could achieve better returns while minimizing risk across a larger pool of investments. It's fairly well supported. It's supported by the Mass Collector Treasurers Association, who oversees, the management of funding investments in towns through the treasurers, who are the folks who invest in each town. The select board supports it. Groups like the Veterans Department and other groups that have cemetery and trust funds also support it because they'd like to improve our investment returns so that some of these perpetual care funds could actually become more of a perpetual fund where it was kicking off enough income to actually sustain operations moving forward. So I don't know if that gives you enough of a background to move forward with a vote there, or if you want to get some more documentation and things to wade through that a bit more.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay as well.
All right, so can we get a motion to adopt the prudent investor language for the town of Wenham trust funds?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay. This one will have dollar amounts attached to it. At some point, we're going to create these funds and probably fund them. I think, the building permit software fee account would probably be maybe $1,000, just a nominal amount. The ambulance one might be, 25 to $50,000. But Steve mentioned last night, the attorney is potentially recommending a different type of fund for the ambulance. So I would suggest we hold on this one because I think it may change.
Is the idea of, I didn't understand this last night, but the idea of these revolving funds is more just administratively to make life easier so we don't have to manage these,
Yeah, so what
manage
happens
the
is
accounting, the AP and the AR in any particular way. We just kind of roll it through these funds.
yeah, so in ambulance in particular, Dano, we collect ambulance fees, but the timing is not always lined up. So we might give somebody an ambulance ride in November of 2024, and we might not get paid until July of 25. So we're in a new fiscal year, and so what ends up happening is the fire department has to hit their line item budget in FY 26 to pay for something that was incurred in the prior year. So by putting a small, $25,000 in there or something, it just helps us manage that timing difference. But the thing about a revolving fund is it's very rigid. So you put the funds in there, but they can't spend it on anything. We would say like you can pay, if you can pay another ambulance service for their share of ambulance fees received. You could pay for ambulance supplies. You could pay for ambulance minor repairs up to X. It's not just carte blanche that they could spend on anything. In the ambulance, the other part of it would be presumably we'd be having stuff in there that would accrue towards buying a new ambulance at some point. And then on the permitting, it's sort of the same thing. Is there's a lag between when we get paid, we get the bills for the permit fees in a different timing pattern than we collect them sometimes. So having whatever $500 and $1,000 in there would help us bridge that timing issue between June and July where we cross a fiscal year. These are both very much things that it's because of municipal accounting and this very rigid concept of fiscal years that you just can't pay prior year things out of the operating budget. So it just gives you flexibility there is kind of the idea.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
This one you could probably vote on. So every year the water department in their budget, they raise an amount of, as part of their budget, they include, typically it's about $35,000 of money to be part of their budget to be raised to transfer into a reserve account for future capital. And then this article it basically says the $35,000 we raised in the operating budget, we're now asking you to transfer into the reserve for future capital. So this is again sort of a procedural one. The money's already raised in the budget. You're just moving it into the reserve fund. So that one you could, the number's fixed. So we could probably vote on that one if you'd like.
So moved.
Yeah.
Sure.
Second.
All right, so 35K water. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. The water department is looking to buy to replace their 2016 pickup truck for $52,000. This is part of the big capital plan, but it doesn't come out of the general fund because the water department is utility fee driven. So this is one maybe you could vote on this one because it is a separate capital item, and if you don't have too many questions on replacing a 2016 pickup truck, you might be able to vote on that one tonight.
Is the cost recouped by the fees charged?
They are actually using planning on using water reserve. So we just moved we just approved moving $35,000 into a reserve fund for water. When they go to buy capital, they then hit that reserve fund for the cost. So it's not charged directly to fees. It's from basically previously received water utility fees that have been put into a reserve funds, for future capital purchases like this.
I'm sorry, but you said it was 55,000 and so that leaves a balance of like 15 grand. Is that?
Oh, no. So there's the 35 we're moving in there for this year is just there's a couple $100,000 in there, which it's just every year they
Oh,
move,
okay.
35 in.
All right. Well, I'm okay with that.
We want to make a motion to approve the $52,000 capital purchase for the water department.
So move.
Right. Get a second and
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. This one might involve more, just because it's a large dollar amount. But we've talked about. I think all of you have heard us talk about the PFAS rules and the need for a full-on water treatment plant, which Wenham does not actually have currently. And this would simply move $500,000 in the water fund into a fund for the design of a water treatment plant. It's not yeah, we might want to wait on this. This is a big ticket item, and I'd like Eric to maybe just give me a little bit better description, only because it's $500,000. But essentially, what they're looking to do is spend $500,000 on the design of this water treatment plant that's going to be required under the Mass DEP rules. Some of you may have heard that we've got a new administration. Previous administration was more regulation focused. The new administration is loosening regulations on things, and one of those things is the PFAS regulations. But the federal regulations may be loosened, but the Mass DEP regulations will not be. So in another state, loosening the federal regulations might eliminate the need for this treatment plant, but in Massachusetts it will not, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you're looking at it.
I'm happy to wait, and kind of since
Yeah,
it's a
let's
project
wait.
that could just wait.
Yeah.
So,
This article here, roadwork, Chapter 90 funding. This is again sort of a procedural one. This is essentially an article that authorizes the town. Chapter 90 funding is money from the state for roadway improvements or sidewalks, those type of things. Every year, towns are allocated funds from the Department of Transportation for this. Ours is usually in the range of $150,000 or so. And what this procedural vote does is, authorizes us to use those funds to make roadway and sidewalk improvements in the town of Wenham, which is what we do every year. But this is just a procedural vote that allows us to do that. So this might be one that's easy enough for us to do.
So moved.
All right. All right. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. CPA reservations will pass because we don't have all of the facts on that yet. Planning board is, no, that's not us. That's not us. That's not us. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we're done there. So we sidestepped the CPA articles, the $500,000 water, the capital budget, and the operating budget. I think we largely hit every other thing other than, the OPEB and stabilization funding articles are the only ones we didn't touch there.
So on the capital budget, it's all or nothing in that article. We're either approving it or not approving it.
No. You can absolutely go through and say, I want more information on the Sallyport door and motor, or I'm,
No,
you
but
could say you.
can we vote against one item? I know we can get more information, but can we vote against?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you could do that, and and that might actually be an interesting, a good vote to take, because that would, if we took a vote tonight, you could certainly take another vote, but after the fact, but that would allow me to say to Steve tomorrow morning, look, we voted on capital last night, and we voted on, we approved 12 out of 13 or 12 out of 15 or whatever it was, whatever the total is here. So,
yeah, I'd propose doing that next. Like, let's look at the capital budget and decide what's
Yeah, let me pull
We
that
wanna
up. So
debate
we've
about it.
already done one of them. Um, so, and within this packet, there is, an information page for each one of these. But do we want to do a quick run through this for ones that we feel are just, no brainers, and then kind of go through it for the ones we either are a no on or we want some more information on?
Well, maybe let's ask around if anybody's got any concerns about any particular ones or ones that we want to dig deeper into. We already did that last meeting and we asked about police cruisers and we asked about the land use and historical commission stuff, but anything else besides those that people want
Well, we're waiting for information on historic guidelines, aren't we, as a result of the select board meeting last night?
to, yeah, Jeff can debrief on that.
Yeah, so historic guidelines, I think, my take is that, the other one, the downtown vibrancy study, we actually essentially moved that to FY27, saying that we should do the comprehensive housing and economic development plan first. The historic guidelines, so the Historic District Commission, which oversees really, just this downtown district, is my understanding. It's not sort of a town-wide set of rules, but it's in this downtown district. That is proposed to move forward. I mean, I think we raised some questions about, maybe the downtown vibrancy and the historic guidelines could be done together or whatever, but I think they still want to move forward with this. But the idea being, and I think Dano, you spoke to it, right now, as someone who doesn't live in Wenham, my understanding is, there are some older guidelines in place. They tend to be a little, they sort of tend to leave things to the discretion of the board that's in place now. Or even can be sort of case by case. Someone might get an approval to do something, and then a neighbor might, get pushback and say they can't do something. So they're looking to sort of revisit these historic downtown guidelines, and to make them a little bit more rigid, and just kind of, they apply across the board, and they're less subjective, I guess, to the whims of any given committee, and just easier for residents and contractors and the board themselves to oversee. And I do think there's some at the select board level, and maybe at the HDC as well. There's that they'd like to move forward with this to make everybody's role in this process of making improvements in the downtown district just more clear, and more evenly applied moving forward. So that's my take from last night. I don't know if you guys took maybe something a little different from that, but I felt like this was still on the table and supported.
You're talking about the historic guidelines still staying in for 26, right?
Yeah, that was my take. Yeah.
Okay, because you said, I think you said, putting it off to 27.
No, that's that was the under the what I was just talking about is the historic guidelines under the Historic District Commission here. What there was is previously under land use, there were three things, and there was one in the middle that was the downtown vibrancy plan or
Mhm.
study. That was the one that was moved, which was also $50,000. That was moved from FY26 to FY27. I think one of the bigger drivers for that was some folks felt, let's do the housing and economic development study first and sort of work through that, and see what we need to do after that, rather than, paying for the, or funding the other study right out of the gate as well. But I also know there was some concerns, Gary in particular, I think, raised the concern that this project where they're going to be putting a couple of stoplights, one right in front of town hall, and I think the other one maybe down by Monument, or something like that. Gary felt it might make sense to wait until until the lights were in place to do the vibrancy study. And the thought, I guess, Dano, I'm thinking that we were saying something of, the lights and some of the other sort of Department of Transportation planning is likely to take many, 5 to 10 years to sort of fully flush out, versus we didn't feel like the other study was as impacted by that, so it made more sense to go forward with that now.
Well, I mean, I would, just to short circuit it all, I would just say the vibrancy plan isn't even on here at this point. So it's not a consideration, right? We've already kicked that down the curb. So it's really just the historic guidelines. I agree with everything you said, Jeff, but really it's just the historic guidelines question and the comprehensive housing and economic development plan. And yeah,
Yeah.
you answered that. So I guess, Bob, does that answer your question?
No, I think what also came up at the meeting was they wanted to understand what was the sequence of studies that were coming up to get some idea of what the total package would cost. And that was
And that was the
addressed.
email with Kate that Jeff, you shared previously saying there's potential for upwards of I can't remember what the number was, worth of studies
I
of
want to say she thought our share of studies might be, maybe another 150, $200,000 to, to be somewhere up in the 300 range in total. But there were quite a few studies that she referenced in the top part of her email that were going to be grant funded. And I know like that was one of our questions last time is, are we, back then last week we were talking about spending 150, but I think we were looking at it in terms of, well, is this 150 out of us spending $1 million, or is this 150 out of us spending, 300? And I think it's more like the latter. I'm going to pull up Kate's email now. And Kate, I mean, does anybody have any deeper questions on the historic district, the historic guidelines study? Is it something they want to know more about, or would it be something they would be comfortable with moving forward?
I mean, I guess I just don't understand it. Like, is the idea to make it easier to do things or harder to do things in terms of building and
I can say, I mean, for the historical guidelines, you mean, David?
I just truly don't understand. So
Yeah, it's in towns that are more well developed or more established policies and procedures wise, it's standard issue to have a historical guidelines that developers can refer to or homeowners can refer to, and therefore you don't have to be subject to the whims of a historical district commission and their particular perspective, given whoever's sitting on it. It's codified and makes life easier for everybody. The flip side is it helps
yeah.
clearly control the what things you do want to control. So it's a thing towns have in place. I just don't know. Is it a certain size when you get it in place or certain longevity? I mean, we've been around for a while. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is that here it seems to be very much geographic versus, like, I know in Essex we have some of these, historic guidelines, but they apply everywhere. And what people get nervous about is, like we have one section of town that is it's sort of those post-World War II ranches that got built, and people will always say, well, geez, based on this, those houses on DeSoto Road are going to be, subject to this in a couple of years, and that's crazy. Do you think, these houses should be subject to all these extra guidelines or whatever? Here, where we seem to be just dealing with this downtown district, I think we've already kind of minimized the area where it applies, and then doing this study would, allow this committee to work with an outside consultant to, really codify what are the objectives, what are we trying to do and control and whatever from a historic perspective, but codify the regulations in a way that are just, sort of easily interpreted and implemented by both the committees and the folks who own these homes and are wanting to improve the residence that they've bought and want to improve, and knowing what those guidelines are. And I assume it could even extend to if you were looking to buy the house, if you felt like the historic guidelines were a little too loose, you might be less inclined to buy that property because you might not be clear on what exactly you could do with it, based on the guidelines being a little less set and rigid than you'd like them to be.
Is the idea to eliminate the commission and replace it with these guidelines?
No,
we
I would
still have to
say
get approvals from a commission for stuff that's outside the guidelines or to get clarity on the guidelines.
How many houses did this impact?
we could look into that. I don't know. I don't think it's a tremendous amount of houses just on the size of the district, but it's it could certainly be more than 10, and it's I'm thinking more than 10 and less than 100, but that's just speculating. I can look into that.
Yeah, my fear is like it's 10 and then we're spending $5,000 a house because, somebody wants to put in a hot tub or something. I don't know.
Who's pushing this study?
The housing, the Historic District Commission is pushing it.
So they want to stay in business, but they also want this.
Yes, and I think in large part it's because I think they sometimes feel like it's tough to know in certain situation what the regulations are really saying. I just think they, whether it's they were written well for a period 20 years ago and they just need to be updated or whatever it might be. I think they
How
want
much money
clearer
is this
guidelines
they
too.
want?
What's that?
How much money do they want for this?
It's 50,000. Let's just table this one.
Okay. Well,
Joe.
I'm a no.
Okay.
I mean, if it's not going to eliminate the need for the commission, they can go do their homework, and I mean, they're going to make up their minds and be capricious about whatever comes to them anyway, as long as they're a governing body. So whatever, I'm a no. So.
Well, yeah. So I shouldn't have been so quick. I mean, where do other folks stand? I mean, are other folks sort of it's just a clear no to me, or do folks want more information?
I lean no, but I'd want to know actually like what they think the shortcomings are, how they'd want to kind of improve it, and I have an open mind, so I'm happy to table this and just get some more
We
information.
leave this one out and act on the rest and then come back to it later for the full
Yeah, we
package.
can.
We also know about the grant for the HVAC.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, and Joe, the assistant town administrator, is sort of the point person on that historic guidelines, and he's back in the office tomorrow after a vacation, so he can probably give us some better guidelines or better information here in total. So we'll do that. Okay, so we brought that one up. Is there another one that I mean, I guess I'd say, we did send around some information on the cruiser. Have folks seen enough information there? Do they still want more? Are they ready to vote?
I'm the one who asked about it. I don't feel like it's a hill worth dying on. I don't think anybody in the town has appetite to ask the police to reconfigure their entire fleet, so it's not worth fighting about. I love the
Right.
examples they sent over though of BMWs and Teslas were the alternative. That's super helpful. Being sarcastic.
Yeah, we'd be willing to get a Bentley if that works.
When is
Well, for
the
a
grant
Tesla,
decision
that will
due,
not
Jeff?
be.
What was that, Jared?
Nothing. I was going to make a joke about putting up a vote for a Tesla in this current climate.
Yeah, it might be a tough one. And Bob,
Yeah.
what did you have?
I was gonna ask, is there a further update on when we'd know about the grant for the HVAC?
So we still think 2 to 3 weeks. I asked Kate that yesterday. She's the person who has sort of the contact on the inside at the Green Communities agency there. I guess the good news, one of the concerns here was that, if we were perceived to be a non-compliant 3A community, that would work against us. But because of the change, the change in rulings on this after the court decision, we are no longer considered not in compliance. Because we have essentially a plan in place, or we have a plan to be voted on, and we are on track to have a meeting about 3A prior to June 30th. That puts us back in compliance, at least for the time being. So we're, I think, a little hopeful there that this grant would be more likely. But yeah, Kate is staying on top of that, and as soon as she has information, she'll pass it along to us, and I can pass it along to you.
Yeah, I think the only one on my side would be the cruiser, actually. And again, not sure if I want to necessarily vote against it, but options are unused or something that's not going to appreciate immediately. I would put more pressure on the police department kind of on this. We have 8 different vehicles for 10 people in the force, I think. It just seems like a lot of capital tied up in one place. That's my vote. I won't block it if people are feeling one way or the other.
Gotcha. Okay,
It's
so
again more of a table it, put more pressure. Let's see kind of what they come back with.
I guess Bob and Jared, any thoughts on that?
On the
I
police
will,
vehicles?
on the
Yeah,
vehicles, I'll vote with whatever the police are asking for. I don't know enough about it, although I do appreciate the fact that they provided some information.
gotcha.
Jeff, would it be appropriate for me to share some of the data we've got for the multiple regression on police?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I mean, does it would it be relative to the capital or you think, or does it make sense to sort of get through the capital part of this and talk about that more when we're looking at actual operating budgets?
You know, it's primarily a measure of operating budget, but the basic, metric being that there seems to be a correlation with the HMI as well as with the amount of commercial business and the miles in town and the population. So, and we actually, on the operating side, are looking a little bit below the regression line, which doesn't say a huge amount, and it doesn't really say that much at all about the capital.
Okay.
I don't think we
Yeah,
need to.
I'd say, yeah, let's keep trying to, get our way through the capital and, yeah, that might, be something we circle back to, on the operating side.
Yeah, I
Okay, so
mean,
we've got,
to that point though, if people are just gonna say if you guys are gonna vote for it, I'm happy to join that vote. Instead of holding this out. So if you guys just want to do the police vehicle too.
okay, so as it stands right now, we've got a pin in the historic. I mean, it sounds like maybe we could go either way on the police vehicle. Um, any other big ticket ones that are, on people's minds?
The HVAC was the big one for me.
Yeah, and the HVAC is a huge project here. I think I used it as the reference when I talked about how these school projects could get away, could escalate so quickly just by, the fact that this is a $2 million project here. To some degree, one of the issues we face is this building, which I always think of as being really old, I guess is, really 20, 25 years old in terms of, it was completely redone in the early 2000s, I think it was. So that the heating system is roughly 20 years old or whatever, but the system itself has problems. It leaks throughout the building, so it's just doing an in-kind replacement of what we have is not really a great solution because it only just replaces the equipment, but it doesn't deal with everything we have to deal with within the walls that leaks and has humidity issues, which cause water and mold issues throughout the building. And so the plan that they came up with here in an effort to go after lots of grant money was to do a geothermal system coupled with a solar backed electrical grid to power it, which is what actually Hamilton just did on their project refurbing Hamilton Town Hall, because that type of system greatly increases your odds of getting all of the grant money, which in our case with the $500,000 would be up over $1 million in total. And so essentially we could do, this system, which will be much more efficient and cost effective to operate long term. We can get that much more expensive system for essentially the same cost as just doing the in-kind replacement, because we would be eligible pretty much for no grant programs under the Green Communities program without doing the more perceived green systems with the geothermal and the solar grid.
I guess I'm personally ready to make a motion to vote on everything except for HVAC as we wait for that and the historical guidelines. I don't know if anyone else feels strongly.
What is the motion? I'm confused. Are you excluding certain items and say approve those, David, or?
Yeah, my feeling would be we approve everything except for the items that we exclude. Save us
So
debate down the line.
the HVAC and the historic guidelines, Bob, would be the two things excluded in what David just proposed, I think.
Unless people think it's cleaner just to wait for Finn and then we can vote on all of them. I'm not sure if he'll want more debate on these.
Well,
items.
whatever will help move the process along, unless you feel Finn should weigh in on these things, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm thinking when Finn comes back, we almost could, I mean, I could, I'll debrief with him when he comes back, in between now and our next meeting. And I would imagine that there's, we could do almost a quick revote where, Finn joins and says, I know the group voted on these 5 things, while I was away, and I vote on those as well. And he just quickly becomes the fifth person. I think that's, easy enough to do. And the more we can agree to as a group of 4, the easier it is to get the one last, person in there. I mean, it almost doesn't matter in the sense that, you've got a clear majority. It's just that it's not unanimous. So, for a town meeting, the more of them we can make unanimous, the better. But I think there is some value to moving forward, unless people have some pretty significant questions on things other than those 2 items.
I second David's motion.
All right, so all but HDC and HVAC.
And yeah, with the caveat that we'd allow Finn to join the vote. I don't know if that's if we have to revote, we revote. But yeah.
Yeah, I can double check it. I'll double check with internally and the clerk, or maybe I'll ask counsel real quick. But I would think we could almost, we do it in a meeting, but he could just vote to piggyback those and add it. So I think that's fine. So, all right. So do we have a motion? We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. So I just took that as everything but the HDC and the town hall HVAC. And we'll get more information on each of those. Okay. So that we've moved through capital, we've moved through the other items in the warrant. I don't know, maybe this would be quick, Bob, and Dano, you were there last night. Do you think there's a value to try to move through whether we want to do stabilization or do OPEB, or discuss the possibility of paying down debt early, or is that better to push and wait until Finn's back next week?
I'd wait for Finn on that.
Same
Okay.
here. I think it's gonna
Let's
be
see if we can get the
more
operating budget settled.
Yeah.
and-
All right, well, let me, okay, so I do. All right, let's do a share.
Justin, I don't need to answer for now, but on the debt, like what's the interest rate we're looking at retiring?
So we have 2 short-term debt instruments. One is exempt under Prop 2.5, and one is not. So the exempt one is at a 5.17% rate, and the other one is at excuse me, the taxable one is 6.54. The tax exempt is at 5.17. And those are debt instruments through actually what we call the State House Note Program. It's sort of through the DOR. And we they just roll over every year, and we pay down a certain amount of principal, and we pay down, whatever the interest is. And one thing you do see is when you have to go back to market each year with those bonds, as they get smaller in amount, you tend to see that your interest rate ticks up a little bit because they're less, suddenly you have $100,000 note and a $105,000 note, and they're not all that appealing to folks. So you pay a higher rate. And the idea I floated last night was just that one, it would save us, say, 35,000, spending an extra 350,000 of free cash would save us about 35,000 or so in interest over the next few years. And the other thing it would do is it would remove $149,000 from the operating budget for FY26. So that was another part of the sort of driving, factor, is that we're not, the money's sitting in the bank and it's not earning 5.17% or 6.5%. And 2, it would allow us to knock $150,000 off the tax levy for FY26. So that's the quick summary of it.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it
Okay.
seems like that 6.5 note we should, but fine. I'm happy to table
Yeah.
that. It's just my initial figure.
All right. And so are you seeing right now? I think it should be like the 10-year spreadsheet. Is that what you're seeing up on the screen? Is that what I shared?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So going back here. This is, this is, last week's budget, that I was showing you. I added a few more things so you could kind of see, over here, some additional, how much are we up over 23 actual, 24 actuals. And then some more percentages here, so you could see, compared to FY 23 actual, we're up, 40% on the general government, and then also what we were over those targets we discussed, the 19% or so for 23 and the 11 or so percent for 24. That what I did show, actually, I'm gonna just pull that up real quick. Um, I'm actually just gonna pull this. I'm just switching to a different thing here because it's
I'm just gonna dial in on my phone for a second and be off screen, but I'm still here.
okay. So I'm just pulling this up real quick, because this is what I presented last night, but I think it might be a good quick summary of sort of what's driving the budget here. So for the most part, all of our departments are, either completely level funded, or they're down some small amount. And so the key drivers are really these things. They're what you would expect. Hamilton Wenham School District is up, 5.7%, roughly, $700,000. The Essex Tech is going up 50 grand, not a whole lot percentage wise. It's a big number, because we're adding 2 new students. Small jump street lighting, for whatever reason, historically, we've just been under budgeting this account. And so every year we're, $5,000 or $6,000 under where we need to be. Trash collection, we've talked about this a little bit. It's going up $23,000 this year, which is about a 4.5% increase. That's basically just the contracts we have now. Next year is the year we expect to see the big spike here that, a couple of you, I think David and Bob, you're on the trash group. We're starting to gather that data to start working on this a bit more. The library, we talked about this a little, it's going up about 17 grand really for contractual obligations. And, they've lowered everything else as much as they can to still be compliant with what they need to do to be funding, receive the funding they need and to continue to participate in the library sharing programs that they participate in. Joint recreation, another large increase, 11%. It's $12,000. This is another item that historically we just never seem to have been able to budget this correctly. In part because it's a joint item with Hamilton, and it's not as simple as other things where it's a budget under our control and we have an exact number in our hands. The big ticket item is, the employee benefits. For those of you who weren't there last night, although I might have put it in my email yesterday, we knew about the Essex Regional Retirement being a, $116,000 increase, due to our growth within the unit, and just what's typically around a 9 or 10% increase annually to reach full funding by 2035. The big item that we received last week was that our health insurance program, Wenham and pretty much every town around us that I've spoken to, got hit with about almost a 20% increase in health insurance premiums, which would be a huge number for us. I mean, it would have been about $233,000. But what we've done in the health insurance line is that's a line that has had a decent amount of cushion in it over the years, in part because you budget for, there's potentially up to about 40 something employees that are eligible for benefits. Not everybody takes them. So I always use the example of I'm eligible for the health insurance. I don't take it. But if my wife lost coverage tomorrow and I had to go on the town plan, that's going to cost the town $20,000 or $18,000, something like that, for a family plan. So we usually have some cushion in there, to account for that. This year, we sort of tightened up that budget and said, we don't need all that slack because we're creating more free cash than we're sort of we want to have as a target. So we cut this back. So I was only going to go up about 35,000 in this budget. I'm now going up about 85,000 to account for this much larger increase. But we're going up 85,000. But if I were to just take the budget and increase it by 19.92, you'd be looking at a 230 something $1,000 increase to this budget. And what I said last night is I feel fairly comfortable that we're still going to have enough money in this budget to cover what the costs will be. But people should be aware that this is essentially $150,000 of free cash generation that we have each year that is, in the FY26 budget is likely going to disappear because we've reduced the budget in the budget process, and therefore we're not going to be returning $150,000 from this budget. And then you're looking at, OPEB, it's a $10,000 increase just on the funding schedule. General liability insurance ticking up 7.5%. That's 15 grand. And then we've got this reserve for, these all the contractual obligations that we're currently negotiating. So, what you'll see here, this is just this. So this shows you this next page real quick. Is showing you what I call the tax rate recap. It shows, essentially with the increased expenses I added and with the tweaks I made to state aid and local receipts, we're still $8,000 under the levy limit. So we're not in an override situation. This page, this gives us your summary of like where everything's coming from. So we're going up 1.26 million in the operating budget, but that's being driven by schools, a small amount from culture and rec. The employee benefits are going up a couple $100,000. And then we've got the big reserve that, in crunching the numbers again this weekend, I think that number is a safe number. Obviously we're hoping we can come in under it a little bit, but, it still feels like a safe number. But if we look at, across general government, public safety, those are down. Public works is up. This 13,000, but that's just the trash is actually up more than that. So we have some cuts in public safety and DPW. So, I'm fairly comfortable with the budgets we have, looking at these from a high level here. But if we move to the next page, I'm happy to hear, any input, the members have about places they'd like to look. That they'd like to see some cuts based on what they've seen, what they've looked at, maybe investigated a little on their own. At a very high level, the budget can move forward as it is because it's under the levy limit, so we don't have to deal with everything that comes with that in terms of extra votes and ballot votes and all that. But it doesn't mean it's a finished product. So. I guess, all I'm saying is I'm happy to answer questions about any individual department that folks have or line items, in the deeper detail. So I'm happy to hear what folks have to say there.
Jared, I have one observation or a question and then an observation. I'm sorry I was not there last night, but when presented with this large increase in the health insurance, did anybody ask why?
It's just the experience that Maya has had, throughout their system. So we buy our insurance through Maya, MIIA, Mass Interlocal Insurance Agency, or something like that. It's based on the data that they have on their Blue Cross experience across the Maya network, and then also in our own local experience here in Wenham. We can ask the rep to come in and talk to us in more detail. He was more than happy to come do that, but we just found out on Friday, so I wasn't going to be able to get him in then. I can dig deeper and find out more. But they're our broker who gets, who they work on our behalf. And the number stinks, but it's also the same number that, I know the Manchester Essex schools had their number is in the 27 range. Essex was at the 1992, and Manchester Essex school was at 26, and they don't use Maya and Blue Cross. They're using either Harvard Pilgrim or Tufts. So I think it's something we're seeing across the board. But I can certainly ask them for sort of a one pager on what's driving that. But yeah, people haven't digested it too much yet because it was just brand new information, sort of right off the presses on Friday.
Well, when I first joined the board, as you guys may remember, I jumped up and down about pensions. I since educated myself as to how the reasons for those costs, which I now understand. I mean, I think, yeah, I'd like to say yes to your offer. Obviously, not now, but we need to be educated as to how the process is. What is the process for coming up with these numbers, as opposed to getting hit? I mean, don't, no, this is not a criticism of anybody, but as a taxpayer, I'm insulted by getting this number shoved in my face, at this point in the budget cycle. We're entitled to an explanation as to what Maya does, who's our broker, should we fire him and get another broker? What are the options that, this is obviously we can't do this in the middle of the budget cycle, but this is something like the pension thing, which, by the way, I have not forgotten about. I plan to raise after the budget cycle is over. I'd like to get some more information from these people as to, just shoving this in the face of the towns and saying, sorry, nothing you can do. It's not acceptable, okay, as a way to do business. And so I'd like to get some more education as to how the process works, how the rates are set, what the timing, in their budget cycle for insurance is, what macro factors are driving, these ridiculous rate increases. Is it because of this scandal with the hospitals, in Massachusetts? There's a whole, in other words, we need to be educated. We're entitled to be educated as to how the process works and what, if anything, we can do to push back in the future.
Sure. And I will say, most municipalities use Maya. It's kind of a quasi-state agency that acts as a broker for not only our health insurance, but also our general liability, all these things. I can tell you that the timing is always terrible. And for municipalities that have earlier meetings like Wenham, which is April, it's more painful because typically this is when you get your information, is like the last week of February. So in a town where you have a Maytown meeting, it's a little more palatable because you've got a little bit more runway to settle things. But this is has always been a pain in the process for everybody. I can tell you that our broker, Larry at Maya, he was out here. We have two different insurances, right? So we have the traditional HMO, PPO type insurance that we have for active employees, younger folks. And then for retirees, we have the Medicare supplemental plans. And those actually renew every year on the calendar year, versus our other plans are on the fiscal year. But Larry was out here and gave us a really good summary of why those rates went up about 15% or 14 or 15% earlier in the year. A really nice summary of that. So I can get him to provide us a very similar document for these plans.
Well, that would be great. And then if you could send me that, whatever it was he provided before, again, before I start screaming and yelling, I'd like to educate myself as to how this cabal works. So
yeah, just making that note to myself. Yeah. Shoot, I just lost my train of thought there. But I think, it gives rise to a larger, question. And I think maybe Dano and I have talked about this at times, or, these benefits, much like the pension, there are these things that are not sustainable, longer term. The pension is driven much more by state law. So we can't sort of change how we do pensions here in Wenham. We could change who, who oversees them and implements them, but the rules themselves stay in place. We do have a bit more control on the local level on the insurance. in terms of we can work with the unions, over time, negotiate, different splits, instead of, 75-25, working towards 80-20 or something different over time. We can look at things like grandfathering folks, which is what you see in the schools a lot, where, the existing teachers have a certain plan, and anybody who comes in new, the old folk are still paying, whatever, 80-20, but the folks who come in after that are paying 75-25 or whatever it might be. I think we're starting to come to a point where we're going to need to start looking at these things, because if we're covering 75% of the cost and it's going up 15% a year, that's not real sustainable long term. So I think, we've been fairly fortunate with our insurance increases, I think, in the past, through Maya. This has been a particularly challenging year for everybody, it seems. But I think having this higher rate is going to make everybody look at these things a little bit differently.
Jeff, what does Maya stand for?
It's the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Agency. And as I said earlier, they cover not only our health insurance, but the dental insurances and our liabilities and our workers' comp insurances. And I would say, generally speaking, they do a good job. One of the things that the town can do is you can look at, it's called the GIC, which is more the state sponsored insurance plans, that we did get the power to switch to that, probably 6 or 7 years ago now, I think, maybe a little longer. The unions prefer, obviously, the Maya insurance is the Blue Cross versus the Tufts and the Harvard Pilgrims and things like that. So, we need to look at, how do you negotiate these things, and, normally what I've seen in Essex anyway in the past is, at some point, if you say to the unions, you're looking at, moving to some sort of cheaper plan or a different, shared cost structure or something like that. When you talk about moving away from the Maya Blue Cross plans, that gives you some amount of leverage. And Steve and I have talked about, that I think we're getting closer to having to look at that, because it's obviously a huge part of the budget. And when it goes up close to 20%, that's just not sustainable over a long term. So I will circulate a copy of the Medicare supplemental information he gave to us back in June or whatever it was, and then we'll ask him to provide a similar summary, for the PPO and HMO plans as well. And I'm sure they have them at the ready, because they're, again, we're not the only town that got this news, so they're getting this question from more than a handful of finance committees across the state, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Yeah,
Beyond that, any other things someone might want to, wants to look at in particular, or, I'm happy to move through as folks, have questions.
Jeff, I was gonna ask the question about what do we want to tell people about the general populace about these various items. In particular, do we want to share with them some good news in terms of, that, for example, our education expenses, when you consider the income of the community, are pretty much in line with other income communities with high MHI. The library is similar. In fact, it's the only one in the comparables that actually has a regional library. So we compare very favorably, at least against the other communities. I don't know how well at this point. I haven't done the analysis of how we compare to other regional libraries with the combined population of Hamilton and Wenham. But I'm just thinking, do we always want to be the bearer of bad news? And maybe there's some good news we might want to tell, but I don't know what we've typically reported in the past.
Yeah, and so Bob, I think I just pulled up the last thing we talked about last night
Yeah.
with the select board. And so, for most of the members, I think we showed this a week or two ago in a much more rough form, but this chart here is something Bob's been, doing a lot of work on for us, in looking at ways to compare and contrast us with other communities. And this is just for total per capita expenses for the town. But Bob's done some work. I could pull up some other charts on education, on police, cultural, and library, and all these things. But this chart in particular kind of gives you the good high level overview of it, just in terms of total spending. Um, what we did is we went and looked at different communities that are sort of our peers in terms of population and things like that. But there are a lot of times they're tough comparables for us, because you're looking at something out Western Mass, Warren, or North Brookfield, or things like that. And so what Bob did with the comparable data that we pulled together is he got the idea of comparing per capita expenses against median household income to see if there were any trends there. And so when Bob says sharing some good news, what he's sort of talking about here is that if we look at this per capita expenses as compared to median household income for the community, what we see is that on this trend line, Wenham falls roughly right on the trend line. And this is I forgot to point this out last night, and Dano reminded me, but we're using Wenham adjusted here. So for those of you who aren't aware, very roughly speaking, Wenham has approximately 5,000 residents if you include the Gordon College population, and we have approximately 4,000 residents if you remove the Gordon students from the population. And the state and the DOR uses the higher number for so many of their different things. And so when they calculate per capita, they use the higher population number. And so Wenham technically on a per capita basis looks better because you've got an extra 1,000 residents. But the reality is that those 1,000 residents really aren't driving services at a level that makes it appropriate to really use those extra 1,000 people, which sort of dilutes the per capita expense. So what we've done here is use that smaller number of 4,000 residents so that our per capita expense is 5,163 rather than I forget off the top of my head, but it's in the 4,000 range when you use the higher population. But what we've seen here is that as you move across the median household income on the bottom axis here, as communities, as the income rises, so does the expense level of the community. And I think in talking with Bob and others, the idea being that wealthier, more educated, more sophisticated residents demand more services from their town. And in particular, what Bob has found is that they demand higher services, particularly in education, and also library, and I would speculate probably in open space and things of that nature as well. And so here we see we're right on the trend line. If you look at a community like Essex, it's above the trend line. They're behind us in terms of median household income, and their expenses are really roughly pretty much the same. We're both right around 5,000 or so. Manchester by the Sea, I always tend to think of as a little bit of an outlier. They tend to be on the higher side of spending things. But Carlisle, which is a community I think many would kind of think is fairly similar to Wenham, they're a little below the trend line. They're they're spending more per capita, but they're just further across. They have a higher median income, which allows them to be a little under that line. The one that Bob and I keep coming back to is West Newbury, which if you look at them in terms of median income, they're pretty much parallel with us, but they're much lower on the expenditure per capita. And so that's one that I feel and Bob and I will probably do some work on this over the summer, is what can we learn from them? What are they doing? They're very much a very similar size community. They apparently have very similar income. What is it that they're doing that they're able to be? I mean, honestly, they're what $1,400 less than us per capita. There's something worth exploring there.
Can I,
And I think, yep.
can I interject for a second or ask a question? Go
Yep.
ahead, Bob. Well, I think the analysis is great. I think the report you pulled from Jeff that you put together, still love to see that raw spreadsheet whenever you're willing or able to share it. Maybe I missed it. Maybe you have, but because you were still tweaking it or getting it
Oh, yeah,
accurate.
I can,
You said it was in
yeah, I
process last
actually,
time we talked, but the thing,
yeah, you're right. I didn't resubmit it. I can actually, maybe I'll just send it right now.
the thing
Um,
I'm, again, I don't, I don't know how to have this come across without feeling like it's poking holes, but I feel like I'm saying, yeah, no, no, of course, as people have higher incomes, they spend more, or they're willing to, like Jeff said, you want to live in a more secluded, less dense scenario where the cost per capita is higher. Like we're choosing this by virtue of our willingness to pay or ability to pay. And so to me, it's not necessarily good news. Like this is saying to the people, well, it's saying to the people, you're choosing this because you are a higher MHI community, and either by virtue of density or by virtue of expenses, whatever, you're choosing a higher expense per capita. And that's what some, I mean, I remember talking to a gal after, after one of the meetings, she's like, yeah, that's why I live here. I like it the way it is, and that's why we're living here. So I think the problem is if you're not in the high MHI, then it doesn't work. And so you create a community that's very, uh, very homogeneous. And there's lots of pros and cons to that. But that's effect. I mean, I think what you're doing is you're naming this names what we're choosing as a community. To me, it's not necessarily good news. That's all. Thanks for listening.
yeah. No, and I get that. Yeah, and it's hard because it sort of shows I guess you could say it about almost any budget, right? I mean, you have people that say, my federal tax dollar, I don't want my federal tax dollars going to X or Y, or whatever. And it's same at the local level is, each person has their own idea
Yeah,
of
and you
what they're
can
willing
move.
to.
Like you vote with your feet. That's how life works. And you can change countries or you can change states or change towns.
Yeah, but that always kind of comes across as, as harsh of saying like, well, yeah, it's expensive here. If you don't like it, get out. I don't know that any community wants to be that community either.
Well,
Uh,
there's a related thing we should not forget. I assume when I heard it at the public hearing a few weeks ago, that 1 in 12, uh, I don't know if it's households or residents, is food challenged in Wenham, and 1 in 10 in Hamilton. Uh, so, you have a mix, and I think that's an important obligation to make sure that, maybe keeping with your comment about, do we become too exclusive, is that your programs do provide for these people who aren't as well off as the upper end of the spectrum. The other thing is just because you can spend the money and you have the money doesn't necessarily mean you're getting good value for what you're spending for. And that's where you want to get into some of the other metrics. I think one of the areas is the library. Uh, we're basically we're above the line because we have a blended MHI with Hamilton, but we're way above the line on circulation. We're above the line on hours, but that's a lot flatter because I mean, people have to be open some number of hours. Uh, so I think that's part of, actually getting more for what you're spending, and people are using the service more. And I don't think that's necessarily true of everything we do in town government. Uh, for example, I think at last night's meeting, Jeff mentioned, there's a very poor fit. There's no fit actually for fire. It could be because of the structure. It also could be because of people don't think of fire in the same way they think of the library or the school system. I mean, you only think about probably fire if there's a fire and something burns down, or you have some kind of disaster in town, or somebody does something really great. Uh, so I think, looking at different departments, I think the expectations of the populace are different depending on what services are provided. And that's sort of what we're trying to dig into. We're also looking for like West Newbury, where do they bring themselves in lower? What are they providing less? So you actually get some action indicators rather than just a statistical thing that says, people who have more money spend more money and live in richer towns.
No, I think those are all great points, Bob. I think there'll be some great gleanings from this analysis on all those things. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
All right, and I'm trying to circulate this updated budget to you guys. We have this issue at town hall that things go missing into some nebulous OneDrive now and then. And the thing I just saved, I'm like, where the heck is it? I mean, the
Doge
only
took
thing,
it.
what's that?
Doge took it.
Yeah. Oh, Doge. Yeah. They have enough stuff. They don't need mine. They don't need my budget spreadsheet. But yeah, so I'm gonna dig that up and circulate that.
Can I just do time check on where we're trying to get to by when?
Um, I think, I mean, if we kind of go through what we've done here, right? So we basically got through capital. We basically got through most of the warrant articles. And now we're on, on the operating budget. I guess maybe, it's 8:30. We're probably getting towards, wrapping up a little bit, in the next, whatever, half hour, or something close to that. Do we want to, I mean, if no, not here. If I go back, where is this? Oh, here, screen sharing. If I go back to sharing this, I guess I would say, if I send out the budget spreadsheet, the updated version of the budget spreadsheet that's got a little bit more data on it, do we want to pick some areas to focus on? Is split up and conquer, and or split up and attack different areas? I mean, are there just any areas in particular people have specific things they'd like to explore? I think with the budget thing in hand, you'll be able to slice and dice it a little bit more and maybe come up. I mean, do we break early and just say, well, use the time between now and next week to really attack the spreadsheet and look at different things? I'll get more information on the health insurance. I'll get more information on the downtown district plan. We'll continue to wait for more information on the HVAC plan.
I mean, I'm just thinking you've gone through it a number of times and there's minimal change to the budget except for the fixed expenses effectively, or the required expenses as usual. Everybody's tried to keep it pretty tight given the required increases, benefits and salaries and all that. So I don't know. For me, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot to play with. And also doesn't seem like there's any appetite to go back and ask for cost cuts that take advantage of that exercise that we did, at least by the select board or others. So, and this is
Yeah, I mean, I guess that.
this is a binary vote, right? By us, it's either you approve the operating budget or you don't approve the operating budget, right?
Other than, I mean, like you said, there's not, other than making deeper cuts, there's not a lot of places to trim, but yeah, I mean, there's still, you do approve the budget as a whole. But there are, you're still at this point able to make cuts in various places. But to your point, yeah, I mean, if you were to say, we'd like to take the fire department up on, cutting one staff member, you may, receive pushback from the, from the select board on that. And that's why I sort of raised that last night, with them to sort of see if maybe they would, weigh in on their appetite for something like that.
Yeah,
And
based on that and kind of to Dano's point, I think that, like, from my perspective, we're pretty good here, except for those three items you mentioned. Once we have some more clarity on that, I think we're ready for a yay nay next week. Probably can move
I
on.
agree.
Yeah.
okay.
They've done a nice job kind of laying it all out, so I feel like it's it's in my head now. So
Is everyone on board for paying down those two pieces of debt? I mean, that's incorporated into the budget. We started out the
Did you weigh in
conversation
on
there.
that, David, based on your expertise on, I mean, I get the basic trade-off on opportunity costs and what you can do with the cash and whatnot at those rates and the potential savings. It seemed like a good idea to me.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of my view is like any gains that you might earn even from the OPEB or some of these other things are all going to same likely be lower. So it seems prudent to pay down that debt. That's going to be materially higher than even where we're issuing the school bond. Um, so yeah, I would be in favor of both. Now I don't fully understand the impact of paying back a taxable bond versus not taxable from just the overall impact of the town, if that matters or not. Like I just don't understand that part of municipal finance. But
That's
like
just an
from here,
accounting thing though, not a
Yeah.
yeah,
real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So David, to that point, the slide I just put up, this actually shows you the FY26 budget that we've sort of been proposing here in the first column that has us $8,000 under the levy limit and a tax rate of 1627 here on the bottom. The V2 here, this is the model where we pay down the debt. And so what you can see is up top, I've reduced my expenses for the year by $149,000, $150,000, right? Which translates to having a lower tax rate, 16.16. The quirk of the municipal tax exempt versus taxable, the difference actually comes in here. You can see that our debt exclusions and the amount of debt that the town had voted to exclude was 887,000 essentially. When we pay down those two debt instruments, one is tax exempt and one is not. And so out of the 150, only 61,000, 62,000 of that is a debt exclusion. The other debt was not a debt exclusion. And so it's just a straight reduction of our what was in our normal Prop 2.5 levy limit. That's the distinction. The other distinction is, the taxable bond is paying is charging 6.54%. The tax exempt bond is charging 5.17, and that's just a function of the bonds that they're selling in the marketplace that are tax exempt. They can produce a lower yield because it's tax exempt to people. The taxable bond is going to have a higher yield because folks are have to have a net of tax return, which is having spent most of my career on the other side of this equation, I never really thought of it in terms of the actual like debt exclusion vote is what determines what it is in the marketplace. And why it took me 20 years to make that connection, I don't know. But that's really the only distinction, is that your levy limit is based on your typical Prop 2.5 exclusion or your Prop 2.5 levy limit. And then the debt exclusion is what you're allowed to spend over and above the normal levy limit because the town at some point voted and said, we'd like a new fire truck and we can't fit that in the normal budget. So we would prefer to have that exempt from tax to pay it off over 10 years or whatever it is. So that is a high level view of that. But that it also sort of gives you the the real impact is that you go from what looks like a potential $16.27 tax rate to about a $16.16 tax rate. We're much further under the levy limit there. And so, right now we're looking at, I think, a 4.7% increase to the tax rate. If we were to pay off the bonds, we're at 3.99%. So you're just a tick under a 4% increase to the tax rate for FY26 based on these, the information we have in hand right now.
Yeah, with all that, then that makes sense. If I think about some of the countries we invest in at 6.5%, yeah, that's not ideal. So yeah, we should pay that off.
Would it
Okay,
make
so
sense, Jeff, to vote on this particular aspect on the debt? Does that help move the process?
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would I would say is that voting to approve that and the nuance there is that we would be having a separate article would be created on the warrant, which would allow us to actually, when the bonds come due in May, we're already planning on paying $150,000 towards these two bonds. This would free up $353,000 of free cash in May. So during this fiscal year, that would allow us to pay that down. If we were to spend down that 353 on the debt, it does, I would say, sort of puts an end to any discussion about putting more in OPEB or putting more into a stabilization fund. We don't probably have the wiggle room to do both. I mean, you could maybe do a token $50,000 into stabilization if you chose. But we're right now, like we had a target of 5 to 7% of operating budget as a target for stabilization, and we're at I want to say 6.18% right now. So we're right in that we're right in where we want to be. So we're, it's not a situation where I'm saying, I'd be saying, we're at 3%. I'd really like us to get it up higher. I'm fairly comfortable with where we are in terms of the percentage of operating budget for stabilization. Sometimes I think an argument can be made, it's good to just be in the habit of putting something towards it every year. So if we wanted to put, 50,000 towards it, you could, but we certainly can't make a material contribution like we did last year.
Yeah, I think that's a discussion for once we get to like the very end. Do stabilization last in some ways, but pay the step first would be my view.
All right. So do we want to take a motion to pay off the 2 short-term debt instruments in FY25 using free cash?
So moved.
Second,
All in favor?
I
Right.
All right.
All right. All right. So that pay that down. Okay. So we'll do that. All right.
Does that mean we
So-
could now do the stabilization, since you're telling us we not gonna be able to do much more? Can we knock off another item? Or you wanna wait?
well, what
y-
one we need to see kind of the final everything in the capital, blah blah blah, etc. Just before we do the stabilization, or shouldn't we? In case there's
Yeah,
any-
and actually, I don't know why it just dawned on me now. But if in fact we don't need the $500,000 for the HVAC, if that grant comes through, that actually changes the calculus on the stabilization as well. And I think it could also change. We might entertain other things. We might entertain using free cash to help supplement the tax rate. There could be other things that, getting a $500,000 back in free cash opens up a lot of different possibilities for us that would be, all of those would be good, good things we could do for the residents. Yeah, I guess I misspoke to say it sort of shuts down the stabilization discussion, because I think, yeah, that HVAC grant is a huge unknown still, that could free up some funds.
Yeah, that doesn't change kind of my view on the vote at all. But yeah, that makes sense. Maybe it gets the police their BMWs. Okay, so I mean, are we left with anything else other than improving minutes, or?
Yeah, I mean, that was really the last piece I had was the minutes I sent around earlier today. Bob actually caught for me that I stopped mid thought on the second paragraph of the second page, and so I did add a quick change there. And let me just see where those are. Make sure these are them. So I'll share these. Did folks have a chance to take a quick look at those, or share those now? But just to give you a quick refresh, the meeting minutes I sent around today were October 2nd. It was the first meeting with Jared. Jared introduced himself. And then the biggest thing we did that night was elected all of the members. Finn is chair, David is vice chair, Bob is the clerk, and Dana was the financial officer. Jared is the new guy, somehow avoided anything.
Thank goodness.
Or whatever. At one point, you were being fronted in the prior meeting as, or before you came on a little late that night, where he had fronted you as potentially being chair.
I
We,
would have
we
resigned
went.
immediately.
Yeah, I don't want to be part of the club. I'm a member or whatever. So the big things we did, so we elected officers, we introduced Jared, we talked about, very rough financial results for FY24, where it looked like, we were going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.8 to 2 million of free cash. And it, sort of came in right around there. We had a very introductory conversation about the financial policies. I had just either sent it out earlier that day or was sending it out after the meeting. And mainly that night we talked about Finn, kind of segued us from talking about the FY24 operations into the targets for free cash and how much free cash we'd have remaining and where those came from. And so we sort of left that as, this was just an introduction to the topic, and we would circulate it to everybody. And then I think most of you took a look and had some notes for me, and we discussed it a little bit more at a different meeting. And there's still some open items there. I know Jared would like to maybe see some more static targets versus ranges. So we need to talk about that a bit more. Then we moved on to a preliminary budget discussion where, we looked at what we thought would, maybe we could absorb a 3.5% increase to the budget and stay under the levy limit. As it turns out, we've been able to absorb a bit more than that. We agreed at a high level that, staying under an override was certainly a primary goal for FY26. And Dano, weighed in and mentioned that, that's a first level goal is fine, but, I think we'd like to, reverse this trend of increasing annually and look for ways to slow growth and slow the tax burden on the residents. And then we had the first discussion about assessed values. As I recall, it was David, sort of mentioned, I just bought my house. I know that means it reset the value. How does that process work? When do others catch up and all that? And so we had a sort of a lengthy discussion about that and how it all ties into Prop 2.5. Then we voted on the meetings from July 11th, and then we set a new meeting and we were done for the night. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or if you feel ready to just vote on those, approving those meeting minutes, so we can get those over to the clerk.
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
Aye.
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 Okay. I think that kind of does it. I think my takeaways are to get you answers on health insurance, the downtown district, the HVAC, to circulate the updated spreadsheet for whatever that's worth. We'll set a meeting for next Wednesday at 7. Work for folks, or do we have different schedules next week? Or
I'm okay with that.
That works for me.
all right. Okay, so we'll set that 7 o'clock next week, Zoom.
And just in forward planning, so is there another kind of select board joint meeting coming up, or
the 4th is sort of the final joint meeting of budget season.
okay.
And then actually there will be, usually it is the, actually it probably says it on the front of this. Then there is the budget hearing or the warrant hearing, which is usually, okay, yeah. So Monday, March 31st is the hearing on the warrant. So we have the on the 31st, we have the hearing on the warrant, and then we have town meeting that following Saturday. So the 4th and then the 31st, which is a Monday.
Is it possible, just not tonight, but tomorrow at some point, just circulate kind of the dates and times that you think things will be? Just because I have to negotiate with my wife on nights and whatnot.
Okay, so I've got two. I mean, what is today? Today is 2/19. So 2/26 is our next meeting. 3/4 will be a meeting with the selectmen. 3/31 will be a meeting with the selectmen. Yeah, and I'll try to think of what else will be in there in between. The other thing I'll circulate is this weekend I will probably work on, since we're largely getting close to the end here, I will start working on what I always call the narrative, which is the 4, 5, 6 page text letter from the finance committee to the residents with numbers and charts and things like that that go into the sort of the preface of the budget booklet and the warrant booklet that sort of lay out the state of the town finances as the finance committee views it. And so, you've heard Finn say, we make sure to mention in our final paragraph, the water department is going to have to build a new plant for the PFAS. At some point we're going to need a new DPW building. The trash contract is coming up. The different things that we view as the big ticket items that are coming down the pike for us. And then we will also build in, we didn't have it last year, but we'll have to think about sort of what the Cutler section of this looks like. Is Cutler, will there be the financial, the whole deck that Finn's been working on isn't going to go into the warrant book, but there'll be some information around the warrant article for Cutler. And then I think, we'll at least have to have the 10-year slide and sort of the Cutler tax impact slide in the warrant book as well. And so, I'll try to work on that this weekend to have it to you guys to sort of edit. And, I'm not looking for you to write all the content or, even be, high level editors, but even if it's just a high level, just weighing in on, what you'd like to see in there, either if I forget, someone says, hey, you forgot to mention the trash contracts coming up or something like that. But then, I think Dano's right. I think we need to have a focus on, what are we voting here? What are we voting on here? We're not just voting on, your taxes for the next year. We're about to vote on your taxes for, essentially the next 20 years here, by voting on Cutler, and make sure that, whatever way the vote goes, we, as the finance folks, the finance committee, feel like, we provided the residents with, the most useful information that they needed to make an educated decision on this.
Great. Sounds good. Doesn't seem like there's any people from the public for comment, so should we just motion to adjourn?
Yeah. So 8:54, motion to adjourn. And second on that.
Second.
All right. All in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for captaining the ship tonight, David, and we'll see you guys in a week.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye now.